The moment I asked the question, the entire church went silent. Not the kind of silence that happens when people are thinking. Not the kind of silence that follows a prayer. This was different. It felt as if every person in that small, whitewashed room had forgotten how to breathe. I can still hear the ticking of the clock hanging near the back wall. I can still remember the smell of damp wool coats drying from the rain outside. I can still see my father's face. He wouldn't look at me, not even for a second. I was 19 years old, and I had asked one question, just one. At the time, I thought it was an honest question, a simple question, a question that deserved an answer. I didn't understand that some questions were considered more dangerous than sins. What happened after that day changed everything. It cost me friendships, it cost me family, it cost me the only life I had ever known. And years later, when I finally learned why everyone reacted the way they did, I realized the question itself had never been the real problem. The real problem was that I had asked it out loud. Before I tell you what happened, my name is Emma. I grew up Old Order Amish in rural Pennsylvania. I was 19 years old when this story began. Today I live a very different life, but the memories still follow me. Sometimes they arrive in dreams. Sometimes they return when I smell fresh bread baking in an old-fashioned kitchen. And sometimes they come back when someone asks me why I left. If stories about hidden truths, difficult choices, and life inside the Amish world interest you, I'd love for you to stay with me through this story. Because what happened to me wasn't unique. That's what makes it painful. I grew up believing obedience was the highest form of love. Not kindness, not honesty, not understanding. Obedience. That lesson was woven into every part of my childhood. I remember sitting beside my mother at our long wooden kitchen table. The table had scratches from decades of family meals. The wood was worn smooth from hands, elbows, and prayers. My mother kneaded bread dough while teaching me lessons about life. God blesses obedience, she would say. I heard those words so often they became part of the rhythm of my thoughts. Obey your parents. Obey the church. Obey your husband someday. Obey God's order. Questioning was never openly forbidden, at least not with those exact words. Instead, questioning carried consequences. The consequences taught you everything you needed to know. I learned that lesson long before I understood it. When I was 12, a young woman named Sarah disappeared from our community. One Sunday she was sitting 3 benches ahead of us. The next Sunday she was gone. No announcement, no explanation, no discussion, just gone. I remember asking my mother where Sarah went. My mother's hands stopped moving. Just for a moment. Then she quietly said, "We don't concern ourselves with that." That answer confused me. But I learned something important. Certain topics made adults uncomfortable. Certain questions created tension. And tension was dangerous. So I stopped asking, at least for a while. Our community sat among rolling fields and farmland. In spring, the earth smelled rich and alive. In summer, the fields stretched endlessly beneath bright blue skies. Autumn painted everything gold and red. Winter covered the roads with snow and silence. Most of my memories are tied to seasons, the sound of horses breathing into cold air, the creaking of buggy wheels on frozen roads, the smell of fresh hay inside the barn, the warmth of kerosene lamps glowing against darkness. Looking back now, I understand why so many people romanticize Amish life. There was beauty everywhere, real beauty. But beauty can exist beside suffering. I didn't understand that then. I thought beautiful things couldn't hide painful truths. By 19, everyone expected me to follow the path laid out before me. Marriage, children, church membership, a lifetime of obedience. Nothing unusual, nothing complicated, nothing different. I had already begun receiving attention from several young Amish men. One of them seemed especially interested. His name was Daniel. Everyone approved of him. My parents approved, the ministers approved, the older women approved. Even my younger sisters teased me whenever he visited. Daniel wasn't cruel. That's important to understand. He was kind in many ways, hardworking, polite, respected. The kind of man every Amish girl was supposed to want. But something felt wrong. Not with him, with the expectations surrounding him. I remember riding home in a buggy after a singing gathering one evening. The moon hung low over the fields. Cold wind slipped through the buggy curtains. Daniel held the reins while I sat beside him. We talked about marriage. Or rather, he talked about marriage. He spoke as though our future had already been decided, as though everyone had agreed except us, as though our role was simply to accept what was expected. I remember staring into the darkness and feeling something I couldn't explain. Fear. Not fear of Daniel, fear of disappearing, fear that my life would become a script someone else had written. I pushed the feeling away. Good Amish girls didn't think that way. At least that's what I told myself. A few weeks later, another incident planted a seed in my mind. A married woman in our district stopped attending gatherings. People whispered. No one explained. I overheard fragments of conversations. Her husband, church discipline, problems at home, prayer needed. The pieces never fit together. One afternoon, I asked my father what happened. His expression changed immediately. He looked uncomfortable, then annoyed, then concerned. That's not our business, Emma. The conversation ended. But something inside me had started changing. I began noticing how often questions disappeared. Questions about families. Questions about discipline. Questions about church decisions. Questions about people who left. Questions about suffering. Questions about fairness. The answers were always the same. Pray more. Trust more. Question less. I remember lying awake at night, listening to rain strike the roof of our farmhouse. The darkness felt heavy. I kept thinking about the same thing. If truth came from God, why was everyone so afraid of questions? I didn't say those thoughts aloud. Not yet. But they stayed with me, growing, quietly, like roots beneath the soil. Months passed. Then came the church service that changed my life. It happened during spring. The fields had turned green again. The roads were muddy from recent rain. Church that Sunday was held at a family's farmhouse. Dozens of buggies lined the lane outside. Women moved through the kitchen preparing food. Children whispered and fidgeted. Men gathered in serious conversation. Everything felt ordinary, completely ordinary. I had no idea my life was about to split into two parts. Before that day, and after. The sermon focused on obedience. I remember that clearly. The bishop spoke for a long time. His voice rose and fell like distant thunder. Most people listened quietly. Some nodded. Others stared at the floor. I listened too, at first. Then he said something that caught my attention. He explained that true faith meant trusting church authority even when you didn't understand decisions being made. Many people nodded. But my mind immediately returned to Sarah, the woman who disappeared, the married woman nobody discussed, the questions that never received answers. Something inside me wouldn't stay quiet. The bishop paused and invited discussion. Normally, almost nobody spoke. That day, for reasons I still struggle to explain, I raised my hand. Even now I can remember the sensation. My heart pounding, my palms sweating, a strange certainty filling my chest. I stood, every eye turned toward me, and I asked the question. I asked how church members could know a decision was truly right if they were never allowed to ask why it was made. The room froze. The silence arrived instantly, heavy, sharp, unnatural. I knew immediately something was wrong. I just didn't know how wrong. The bishop stared at me. Several ministers exchanged glances. My father looked down. My mother went pale. Nobody answered right away. The clock ticked. A baby cried somewhere in another room. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Finally, the bishop smiled. But it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile adults use when they are disappointed. He said that faith required humility. Then he moved on. That was it. No discussion, no answer. The service continued. But something had changed. I could feel it. Like a storm gathering beyond the horizon. I remember riding home afterward. Nobody spoke. Not my parents, not my sisters, not me. The silence felt heavier than any argument. And deep inside, a terrible realization began forming. I had crossed a line. I just didn't know how far beyond it I had gone. What I discovered in the weeks that followed would show me exactly how fragile belonging can be, and how quickly an entire community can turn away from someone who asks the wrong question.